All right, greetings everyone. I'm going to be an announcer, very informal. My next job is to invite our mayor, Mr. Ed Malloy, to come up and give a formal greeting or informal greeting. So, Ed, would you like to come up?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So now I'm intrigued. What is the difference between a formal and an informal? I don't know. I'm going with informal. Thank you very much. Terry, congratulations on everything. Congratulations on putting this evening together. You and I just met for the first time a week ago, and I really appreciate you for the end of your story, of your most recent episode, and for bringing another great headline to Fairfield. Once again, from around the world, internationally, Fairfield is in the headlines. So thank you very much for that. And I thought, you know, did she do this intentionally or unintentionally? Because here's another great story that you can add to your repertoire. And it really is obviously a heartwarming and wonderful story. We were all getting kind of scared there after day one or day two passed, and there was something very real that was happening. But to see you here sitting tonight, we can only feel good about everything and how this ended. So now, and I don't know whether you have one of these in your repertoire or not, but now you do have your, and in at least in America, we have a phrase, and I'm going to imagine it's probably an international phrase, but the phrase, and lived to tell about it. So now, if this isn't your first, now you have and lived to tell about it story, like the surfer who was attacked by the shark and lived to tell about it, or the hiker that was attacked by a grizzly and lived to tell about it. Yours is, I turned down a dirt mud road in Iowa and lived to tell about it. So congratulations. And I was thinking, Terry didn't ask me to tell a story, but I figured she probably would be pleased if I did tell a story. So I didn't really have anything prepared until I got into the room and sat here and I said, you know, I've been to Halifax once, and it was on Christmas. And something happened on that visit. I lost my front tooth. So I'm going to tell the story about losing a tooth on Christmas 1973 in Halifax. So at the time, I'm originally from the New York area, Mineola, New York, if you can read my tag. And I was going to college in northern Maine, Ricker College, which is in Holton, Maine, and it's on the border of New Brunswick. The campus was 2 miles from the Canadian border, and the farmhouse that I lived in most of the time that I was there was about a half a mile with a view of Canada. So I played on the basketball team, and we'd gotten a new coach. And again, this is a small school. This is 1,500 students. We'd got a new coach for the team, and he had big aspirations for our team and high hopes. You know, we played in a smaller league of colleges in the New Hampshire and Maine area, and he got us into a Christmas tournament in Canada. It was Canada's Christmas tournament, and it took place at St. Mary's University in Halifax. And in this tournament were the number 1, the number 2, the number 5 teams in Canada, and our little college from across the border. So we were scheduled to play the number 1 team, you know, coming right out of the gate, and this is a team of all, urban American basketball players recruited to play in Canada. So we were way outmatched. And we lost that game by probably 30 points. So we played the consolation game 2 days later, and it was in an arena, and I don't remember the name of the arena, in downtown Halifax, and it was going to be on Canadian national TV. So we were playing the number 5 team in Canada. Well, Canadian basketball is not quite what it is in American college basketball, so by the time we got down to number 5, we were actually a competitive team. We did lose the game by, I think, 8 points. But in the middle of that game, you know, and I played hockey in high school, and I understand that Canadian hockey is really where, you know, where collegiate athletics is in your country. So what happened to me is just probably pretty ordinary in terms of Canadian basketball as it is akin to Canadian hockey. So I'm underneath the basket and there's a shot going up, and everybody know what a box out is. So you basically position your body like this, center of gravity, arms wide, your butt out a little bit there so you're creating a space that no one can get in. So if the ball comes anywhere within this zone, this is yours from boxing out. So the ball hits the rim and it's coming right down in front of me. And I'm jumping and I'm about to get up and grab this. And then over from my side is a Canadian player who just comes reaching in and goes, boom, like this, with his hand up, so the ref probably doesn't see it, and hits me in the mouth. And I spit out tooth and blood. And I walk up to the ref and I say, is that not a foul? Technical foul on me for protesting about this. So that's how I lost my tooth in Halifax 45 years ago today. So anyway, it's very nice of you all to come out. I'm sure there's some really great stories that are that we're going to hear tonight. I wish you all a happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, and a great holiday season here in Fairfield. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. All right, well, thank you. I am going to now introduce Terry June Harnish, who is the organizer extraordinaire for this evening. I am also going to mention, before I do that, just when and how I met Terry myself, which was just several weeks ago. And I had seen posts on Facebook that this woman was missing. And I read the story, and they had a picture of her, and I didn't know her. And just hoped that was going to work out okay. Well, we know she was found on Sunday, but I didn't see anything about that. So Tuesday, we have our regular Toastmasters meeting, and I'm sitting there and I'm saying hello to, just members and stuff, and I see this woman walk in and sit down. And I'm looking at her, and I said, I think that's that woman. And I wonder if I need to tell somebody. Because, maybe she didn't even know she was lost or that people were looking for her. I just sort of went this, and I was trying to get on the side, and is that who that is? And sure enough, it was her. Of course, everybody else knew she had been found, but I didn't yet. And then Terry introduced herself, which I will now do. She is a former Golden Speakers Toastmaster and is wanting to join again. She was actually there at the beginning of the Toastmasters Club creation here, 1989, which was way before my time, so she's just told me all of that. Some of you that maybe have been in Toastmasters before would know her. She is a professional storyteller. And when I asked her, could I say that? She said, well, you can. I said, well, I think it's very cool, because when someone is a professional anything, it usually means there's passion and commitment involved. So that is intriguing to me. So she's a professional storyteller. She's from a small town in Nova Scotia. She has successfully run 8 different storytelling events in the past, and this is her inaugural Once Upon a Winter Solstice storytelling event here in Fairfield. So we're very proud. She's just organized all kinds of things. Toastmasters is considered storytelling a foundational skill. So we're delighted to have that meshing going on. And without further ado, please help me warmly welcome to the stage Terry June Harnish. You're welcome.
I need your help.
Okay. I was going to shake your hand.
Welcome to the first annual Once Upon a Winter Solstice. I'm delighted to see that you could find a way to be with us tonight. It was a gamble, having spent all those days in the cornfields. My car that I rented the day before Thanksgiving has been stuck in the mud for 3 weeks. I went to renew it yesterday in Ottumwa, and she said, let me come out to the car and check your mileage. She said, you've done 126 miles in 1 month? What have you been doing in Iowa? I said, well, look at it. And she looked at the mud inside and the mud outside, and she said, you can't return it like this. You'll have to have it detailed and cleaned. We don't accept muddy cars. And believe me, it was muddy. I can only say that thank God the Fairfield Department of Police and those wonderful, wonderful farmers, George in particular, his son Jared, and friend Malcolm, came by in the snowmobile. I'd run out of gas. I was freezing cold. I have a new knee, and I had to span the seats with one leg in each side. And I was living on marzipan and kombucha. So it wasn't much of a diet. And I was very, very happy when the boys came by. They went by me, I turned on the hazards, then I turned on the brights, I honked the horn, the kids turned around and came back. They opened the passenger door and said, oh my God, she's alive. My shoes were so terribly covered in mud. I'd left them outside for the 4 days. And when George, the father, came back with a huge tractor that was heated, in bare feet, I had to climb up the ladder into the rig. Then he took me the 2 miles out to Sergeant Tanner from the Fairfield Police, and Tanner drove me back to Carmen Quinton's. Next day was a big adventure. I had to go off to Jefferson County Hospital. And when I showed my Canadian health card, Susan, as the check-in, said, "Oh, I've heard about you. You're the one who was caught in the cornfields." Then I went through to have blood work, urine, x-rays, up the yin-yangs. Every single person knew that I'd been in Fairfield. I was that Canadian. And when Dr. White said, "I think you have a brainstem bleed, I'm sending you by ambulance to Iowa City," even the paramedics knew. I get to the U of I and they knew. And then I heard my friend Esther in Blandford, Nova Scotia, happened to call her friend in Nice, France. And she's talking away to Martine, and Martine said, "Stop it, I have a story to tell you. Have you heard about this lady in Iowa? She's 72, she's a spinster, and she's only living on marzipan and kombucha." And Esther said, "This can't be happening. This is my friend Terry Harnish from Hubbard's Cove, Nova Scotia." She said, "It's all over the French press." I said, "All over the French press. I know the Canadian Broadcasting Company, as it happens, is on every night from 6:30 to 8. They interviewed me for 2 hours, and then they said they'd call back, and I could only answer the questions. I couldn't spiel on and tell a Terry tale. So something very critical came up, and I got bumped. But it's been, I'm rather embarrassed. It's been broadcast all over who knows where. It's rather exciting to be home in Fairfield, but I must say, you know the story, Aesop's fable, the tortoise and the hare. I'm that little Terry tortoise that's been slugging away for a month here in Fairfield. I couldn't have more obstacles. My cell phone doesn't work. Where I'm staying at Carmen Quinton's, Facebook and Gmail doesn't work, so I have to go to the Fairfield Library. And I have been doing this. You know, I got out alive, but my beautiful velvet coat, my storytelling coat that's at the back, I fell twice, and because I have a new knee, I couldn't get the leverage to get up. So I lay for 2.5 hours on my front, and I must say the mud in Iowa is very yucky. It's very cold. And my bracelets were so encrusted in mud, it took me, well, they stayed in the car for 3 weeks until the car was freed. But the funny thing is that Captain Thomas, or Chief Thomas, decided last week he would go and investigate and try to figure out where the car was. So in a police car, he drove out, and didn't he get stuck? And he had to radio for a tractor. And the tractor driver came and he said, "Heck, while we're here, let's take Terry's car out." I didn't know the car was even out. But we happened to phone George, the tractor driver, and he said, "You know what? Your car's been gone for a week. I don't know where it went." So the mystery of the missing car. So I take my beautiful velvet coat to everybody's. I get it dry cleaned from Mount Pleasant. I get the coat back and I wear it to the dome. I leave it in the ladies' dome, and there's a sign that says free for 2 blouses. But some woman thought my coat was free. So she disappears with the coat and the keys. So the car is locked and in the parking lot for 3 more days with my cell phone and the whole portfolio about all you wonderful storytellers that are going to be part of this celebration. So has luck been with me? I don't think so. And that's why Charles made me this wonderful fairy wand. I had a wiggle wand. Do any of you know about the Wiggles? The Wiggles are an Australian troupe that cater to 0 age to age 4. And they were just in Halifax. They do a 10:30 in the morning show, a 2 o'clock, and a 6 o'clock. So I went at 6 thinking, I have to be entertained by these wonderful experts. So I went and I spoke to the ticket lady and I said, "How much?" And she said, $45. And I said, $45 for a retired tooth fairy? A senior citizen on a fixed income? And she said, "Yes." And then she put her hand in the till and she said, "I'm giving you a comp." I was blown away. So I went in and there were bleachers everywhere and all the mummies and daddies are up there, but with my new knee, I couldn't possibly try to get up. So I sat on the ground floor 4 rows from the stage. And I thought, I've got to get a clear view of these Wiggles. I thought there were only 5 in the troupe. There are 27 of them. And they make their way across Canada and they cater to the 0 to 4. So I went to buy something in the concession since I'd saved all this money. And I bought a wiggle wand. And the day I was stuck in the cornfields, I took the wiggle wand with me, but when I fell the first time, the wiggle wand got really muddy. So I lay it in the bushes. And I thought George would be able to come by and find the wiggle wand so we could use that tonight. So the wiggle wand is in the cornfield. And so Charlie made me this. So the idea tonight was to tell Maharishi Mango magic. But all of those old timers, Teresa Olsen Sorflatten, Lisa Ashelman, all of the greats of the movement from the early days haven't been able to make it. Mysteriously enough, they're not here. But the stories go on, right? We plant the seed and we hope that every year we can have a festival. It's time we shared our stories. We have so many to share, and it's so important. My great aunt, Dr. Helen Creighton in Nova Scotia, was Canada's foremost folklorist. She wrote 13 books, Blue-Nosed Ghosts, Blue-Nosed Magic. The list is endless. And she collected 17 volumes of folk songs. And who does she share, or who shared them with her? Pete Seeger. And Pete worked with her in Washington with the Rockefeller family and in Maine. And if you look at Pete's legacy, he's left the world, 90% of his songs are from Aunt Helen's collection. I was just in Jonesboro, Tennessee for the 46th National Storytelling Festival. I haven't been there for 22 years. It was like I was just there yesterday. And I can only say that going home to Jonesboro is like coming home to Fairfield. 15,000 storytellers and listeners were there. I took my 48-year-old niece because I have a new knee and I have a case of vertigo. So Robin was with me, and we arrived in Johnson City very late at night, and we had booked a condo, a 2-bedroom condo, for $900 for the 5 days. So we got to the Johnson City airport. No luggage, it was back in Atlanta. So we left word that we were staying at number 22, whatever the street was, of the condo. And we went outside to get an Uber. You can't get an Uber in the United States with a zip code. So I tried Iowa, that didn't work. We tried any combination of numbers, nothing worked. So we're sitting there, and all of a sudden this man drives by, and he looked out the window and he said, "Do you need some help?" I said, "Yes, we need a drive to Johnson City." "Oh, jump right in." His name was Stephen. He had his toes all amputated. He has severe diabetes and a PICC line in his arm. So Stephen drives us to number 22. We go to knock on the door, try it to see if we were there, and it's locked. So we decide, well, there's something really mysterious going on. So we sat in the car with Stephen, and when all of a sudden a man came up, opened the door and went in. Well, this was really perplexing. So Robin gets up and she says, "Excuse me, you're in our condo." He said, "Excuse me, I live here." And she said, "That's impossible. We've rented this for 5 days. We paid $900. And he said, "Look, I'm the cardiologist here in Johnson City. You are barking up the wrong tree and you're not sleeping with me." So here we were, it's almost midnight, and we're left with no luggage, an address of number 22, and we had no place to go. So Dr. Tom says, "Look, I get a discount at the Courtyard Marriott. I'll drive you there and we'll get the corporate discount." This year for Jonesboro, the rate went from $100 a night to $257. Well, that's a pretty steep increase. So Dr. Tom takes us to the Marriott, and his rate was $95. We were in heaven. Hallelujah. So he drives Robin back out to the city, the Tri-Cities Airport to pick up our bags. Robin looks at me when she gets back and she said, "You're looking very old and wrinkly. I think I'll put some cream on you." So she sells Arbonne, which is supposed to be the next best thing to, God. And so I can remember I was almost asleep and she rubbed it all over me. And I went to sleep and she went to sleep. At 4 o'clock in the morning, I got up and went to the bathroom. I was covered in hives from head to toe. My eyes were swollen shut and I looked like a lobster. So I woke her up and I said, "Sweetie, I don't know about your cream." I said, "But I think I have to go to the hospital." She said, no, we'll call and get some Benadryl. But we realized we should really get Dr. Tom to prescribe something. Anyway, we advanced through to Jonesboro. It's a 45-minute drive. We get there, and it's 89 degrees. I'm dressed like I'm coming to, North Pole. And we arrive, and there's 15,000 of us. And they have golf carts everywhere to take us around, thank God. And lordy, we go through the hospitality area to register. And the lady said, "Welcome to Jonesboro." And I said, "Well, thank you." And she said, "How are you doing?" I said, "Well, we got stood up on our Airbnb. We have no place to stay." And she said, "Do you want to stay here in Jonesboro?" I said, "That would be ideal." She said, "But they're booked 10 years in advance." I said, "I know." I said, "How can you create a miracle?" And she said, "Leave it to me." So we go in to register, and behind the table are Sandra and Gary, and they said, "Welcome. We're calling the ambulance. You have to go immediately to the hospital. You need an EpiPen or you're going to die today." And I said, "Hold it. I'm not going to the hospital. I'm here to hear Donald Davis, my heartthrob." And I said, "I'm not getting on the golf cart. I'm going to stay." So they had 2 paramedics, 2 firemen, and 2 ambulance workers, and 3 committee members. And they were very insistent that I get on the gurney. I said, "No, I refuse to." "You're going to die today." I said, "No, I'm not going to die today." So to make a long story short, I went and spent 3 amazing, wonderful days. We're all old hippies. We just regroup, especially here in Fairfield. We share stories, we sing songs, and we play! Right? And that's what we're here to do, is play. Oh, my magic wand fell apart. Sorry, Charlie. It exploded. Exploded with happiness. So my troop of friends that I was expecting to tell, Tim couldn't bagpipe in the tradition of storytelling. Murray, she always believed you had a bagpiper, but Tim couldn't make it. And in the tradition of Canadian storytelling, you always have a bagpiper. And things will pick up. I cannot say do or die. We're here. We're celebrating. Amen. So thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you to my new family, the Foxes, who drummed us tonight. They did the 4 directions. Thank you. Heaven and earth. This is their territory. We are here occupying their territory, and we have to honor their tradition. So we were very blessed to have them as part of the program. So every summer in July, I have Once Upon a Bright Blue Bay. And over the years, I've worked hard to establish this festival. The first year, for you Canadians who follow Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, Fireside Al, or Alan Maitland, the king of radio, ended up moving to Mahone Bay, which is quite close to the village of Hubbards. And Alan decided he'd be my newest best friend. And he writes a series of books called Fireside Al. And Alan is one of the true giants of radio. And I remember going to the Lord Nelson Hotel in Halifax and sitting to meditate. And I thought, my hero is here tonight. Finally, I'll see him in person. So I closed my eyes when I could hear a rumbling. And I opened one eye. And I thought, this can't be him. He's a disaster. I think he had 2 different socks on. His shoes were all stuffed. His trousers were baggy. He he looked like some poor old fool. But I sort of said, never judge a book by its covers. So I went into the room where he was reading, and he only read 2 stories, The Little Matchstick Girl and another. And he said, now it's time to sell my books. I said, excuse me, Mr. Maitland, I'm a storyteller and I need to hear more stories, please. I'm here to sell my books. And I said, please share a couple more stories. And so our friendship began. And right up till the time he left Nova Scotia and moved out west to British Columbia, I went to British Columbia to be with him as he was dying. And I rang Marilyn on Suk Island, and I said, I'm on my way on the ferry. And she said, we're being married in an hour, and he'll be dead within 2 hours. So don't come now. So I had to say goodbye to my dear, dear friend, Alan Maitland. So if you ever get a chance to Google him, you'll hear his legacy that he left. It's the same legacy that Dr. Helen Creighton left me. She was a 90-year-old spinster when she died. And because she had no place to go at Christmas time, she came to us in Hubbard's. My mother was her niece. And so we grew up with ghost stories all the time. You know, you'd have the Christmas tree lit, and you would have just magical moments with her. It was amazing. And I remember being summoned to her house, her condo in Dartmouth, and she said she had an agenda. And for Aunt Helen to invite you for tea was really quite an honor. And I thought, an agenda? What could she mean by an agenda? And so I arrived with a bouquet of flowers. And she said, you sit here. And I said, oh, no, I want to help with the tea. Oh, no, this is my house. She was all of 4'9". So she went and got the silver tea service and carried it in and plunked it down. And she said, zip your lip. We're not having any talking from you. I have an agenda. I thought, oh my glory, what could the agenda be? She said, I don't know about you moving back to Halifax. I left in '66 and I was home for a short time in the '80s. She said, everywhere I go, you're there. How come you follow my every footstep? I said, have you ever? She said, no, you're not supposed to talk. And I kept thinking, I'm your guardian angel. That's why I'm everywhere you are. National Film Board, the National Film Board agency in Canada, has done many documentaries on her. And if you Google Helen Creighton, you'll find out her legacy that she's left. So number 2 on the agenda was, when you came back, you joined that Halifax Women's Network. I was so sure you were going to burn your bra in Halifax parade grounds. I couldn't understand where she was getting this from. And she said, number 3, she said, you do some sort of ooga booga magical meditation. She said, I want you to keep doing it. I think you're on the right path. She said, now you can speak. How do you follow that? She died in my arms at age 90. She left me the legacy of storytelling. So who else wants to step up and take the challenge of telling a story? You're all old meditators and some governors. There must be stories to share. Ron or Veda? I need your help getting down.
Hi. So as you've heard from Terry, I've gone by a previous name, but my previous first name is still intact. My middle name is Veda. That's how most people know me. I'd say in about 1997, I decided to take a trip to Halifax, and it seemed like a good idea, a good idea at the time, where Terry had been in Toastmasters and she had left Fairfield. I had known her in Toastmasters, where we joined together in the very beginning of the Golden Speakers Club in 1989 together. And I knew how lively she was and how bouncy she was, and she was staying a lot with Bonnie Gould, and Barry is here tonight. So we were like a bunch of old friends. And so I thought, you know, it's a good idea to go up and see her at her native environment. And I was in for a little bit of a surprise because one of the things she did was bring us to the, to the old church in Hubbard's, and we sat around hearing a lot of very incredible ghost stories. Now, I grew up in Massachusetts. We had some ghosts, but they didn't make us a lot of trouble. We just kind of see them once or twice and do something for them, and they'd go. But here we were hearing stories of people in Victorian houses, from the people themselves, with, there'd be a rug like this on the stage, and there'll be a big lump in the middle, and it would turn out to be birdseed, which had been somehow carried up from the basement and placed underneath the rug or up into the attic. And these were pretty convincing, and I was thinking, interesting, but Terry never says she has any ghosts in the bed and breakfast where we're staying. It seemed pretty ordinary to me. So I go to sleep that night, I kick off my socks off my bed, and literally I had about 1 foot of space on the left side of my bed, very tight. Someone would have not been able to go up there, and in the morning they're missing. And at breakfast I'm like, Terry, did you come in my room? I mean, this is so bizarre that, you know, my socks are missing. And I go into the bathroom, and on the counter, my pair of socks is there. But it looked like it had been washed and folded. And folded up in such a way that I never would have folded them. And no one had been there. No one had taken those socks. So it was a very friendly and neat ghost. And she just has such a lovely place there on the water. And it's at Hubbard's Bay, and I think it's swimmable about 30 days of the year, according to anything that I ever had. But it's probably one of the very few trips I've actually gone to Nova Scotia and gotten to see the whole thing. It's just a very delightful and slightly old-fashioned. Growing up in New England, it was like 20 years earlier in New England, or 40 years earlier in New England. It's a very precious, somewhat wooded, the weather is mild, there's beautiful places there. So it was such a wonderful experience to see you there, Terry. So that's my story about the ghost socks.
My name is Susan Chipman, and I'm from Kentville, Nova Scotia. And I've known Terry since the early 80s. And we've had some really fun times together. And I want to tell you about one time. It's not about a ghost story. So Terry's family has this resort in Hubbard's, and her parents have a house that's on a little lake behind the. So there's the beach, and then a lot of beaches have these little lakes, and then her parents have a house, and they used to go to Florida every winter. So Terry would invite a bunch of people over for a party for the weekend. So I was teaching school in Nova Scotia at that time, and Terry would phone and say, come on over, we're having a big party. And we were having what you would call a poor taste dinner. You would dress in poor taste, but the food was great. We were having lobsters. So Terry had a big bag of geek glasses that she would get at these yard sales. So everyone would wear geek glasses and really weird clothes, and then we'd have this great food. And then the next day we decided to go. They had a little cabin in the woods in a lake, and her brother has a team of horses and a wagon, and we were cross-country skiing across the lake. And then when we get tired, we'd get on the sleigh, and Reese would, no, it was Clyde, her brother Clyde, would take us over there. And then we got to the cabin. We built a fire. We had some food. It was just a really, really fun day to be out in the woods. And we played cards. And then we had to realize that we had to cross-country ski all the way across the lake and get back down to our car. And so we were totally exhausted by the end of that. I think there were 8 or 9 of us at this day. And I remember the sun. It was a beautiful sunny day and the cold air and the sleigh ride and how much fun we had. And Terry, I just always remember your great stories. You'll have to tell the Queen Elizabeth story. That's a good one. So that was my Nova Scotia story. And I go home every summer because I love it up there. And it's nice, the weather's great, as Veda said. So I wanted to tell you a story of when I lived in Papua New Guinea in the 70s. I went as similar to a Peace Corps worker, but I was a Canadian on CUSO, it was called, Canadian University Service Overseas. And I lived in this little island called New Ireland, which is next to New Britain in Papua New Guinea. And I was teaching at a school about 90 kilometers from the main town. It was an all-girls school called Medina High School. And I lived in a little house that had 12-hour power, and it was we had a school generator, and all the teachers had their own house on the school compound. I'm nervous. Anyway, this is a funny story. The power would go off at 10 o'clock at night. So a lot of times the teachers would get together and hang out at another teacher's house, and we'd write letters by candlelight home or whatever we were doing. So I was walking back to my house, and I had to go across the playing field, and there were a lot of frogs on the ground everywhere. So you would walk like you were kicking them so you wouldn't step on frogs. So you would kind of do this goose step as you're walking across the playing field. So I got to my house, and I go in, and I light the lantern because I don't like the dark, because I had rats at the first house where I lived, and they scared me to death. And I had a lot of cockroaches at this house. It was called Cockroach Corner. So I go in the bathroom, and I'm sitting on the toilet, and I hear this scraping noise. And I'm thinking, oh, there's something outside my bathroom there. And I thought, what's going on, you know? What kind of critters out here? So I get up to flush the toilet, and I look in my toilet, and there's a huge black coconut crab. And these coconut crabs go up the trees and get coconuts. And I had just been sitting on the toilet, and I thought, oh my God. I was so happy I wasn't a man. So I slammed the lid down, and I put 3 bricks on, and I walked back to my friend's house, and I said, I gotta have a teacup, some tea, because I'm freaked out with this coconut crab in my toilet. Well, the next morning after I came back, went to bed, and woke up the next morning, it had gone out the way it had come in. So that was my New Guinea crab story.
It's on its way. All right, so I was going to tell a story, but if I waste the story without talking about post-traumatic growth, Scott will kick me in the butt later, which Dr. Scott Terry is in the back. So this is a story of post-traumatic growth. So about a year ago, was it a year ago from now, I was suicidal. And a lot of my trauma from childhood really came back. And so during that time, I had these images of my dad hitting me and people just picking me up with one hand. I had my Uncle Nelson, he was this really big guy, and he would just grab me. I barely knew him, and I would literally be crying and telling him to put me down, and my parents wouldn't do anything. You know, they're supposed to protect you, but I guess for whatever reason, they wouldn't. They didn't do anything about it. And so I was very vulnerable and very sensitive. Now, to this day, I'm thankful that my dad hit me. You know, I don't think hitting your kid is good at all. You know, just scientifically, it doesn't work. I don't think anyone should hit their kid, but I can sit here and say, I am grateful that my dad hit me, because that's where we were at the time. So, when I was about 12 years old, I had a younger sister that was born, and she was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I remember being in the hospital. My mom was in the bed, she had just given birth, and this little baby comes into my arms, and I'm holding her for the first time. And the umbilical cord is so gross, by the way. I have to like just take that out of my vision. I'm just looking at her face, this little creature, most beautiful eyes ever. Her name's Chelsea. And I just sit there and I think, wow, this is real love, you know? And so just moving forward some years later, I'm 19 now, and I get the TM technique. All right, I'm a very angry person at this time. I'm probably smoking about 7 grams of marijuana a day, getting drunk, belligerent, selling weed, no direction with my life, didn't know what I wanted to do. And all of a sudden I have this experience with TM and I go, oh, things are gonna change. Nothing's ever gonna be the same. Sure enough, as time went by, my dad lightened up, my whole family lightened up, and my dad never laid a hand on my younger sister. She wasn't treated as we were treated. And it doesn't just have to do with me and my older sister protecting her. It has to do with the change in his heart. So I'm sitting here today talking about this change of heart. And so my older sister got therapy, and she said I inspired her to get therapy. And it's really TM and supportive nature that inspired me to get therapy and counseling. And it's just this change in karma. So my dad came from the Azores of Portugal, where it's very common where you spank kids, came to America, and the system was that he hit me, I would then be angry, hit my kids, then they would grow up, have kids, they would hit their kids. And so there's this change in karma in which I started doing something different than my family had ever done. And that was to have the TM technique. And it didn't just soften my heart, but my whole family's heart. My whole family grew. I didn't just have post-traumatic growth from changing myself. My family experienced post-traumatic growth from that change. So post-traumatic growth isn't just about individual change. It's not just about sitting there saying, oh, well, I had PTSD, and now I've created something with that. It's more than that. It's a ripple effect into your family. And once you have that ripple effect into your family, that ripple effect goes on into your family's friends and the people that they know and interact in every day. And so I come here asking you, depending on what your trauma is, or whatever has happened to you lately, or what will happen to you. Maybe someone's died recently. Maybe someone you love very close. What do you want to create with that? Maybe something happened to you 10, 20 years ago that you're still holding on to. What do you want to create with that? And how can you create a world for yourself which you can then ripple on to the world around you without meaning making, having an actual impact today? Thank you.
was the 80s. Trying to be cool, trying to be conventional, which was not my strong suit. I had met a lawyer, and we were getting to know each other. This was going to be our first night. He invited me over. He was going to make me dinner at his house. He's a guy. Like, I wasn't expecting much. Of course, I'm a non-cook, so that's not saying much, but I really wasn't expecting anything. I arrive. He is all nattily dressed. We're going to have, it was, I don't even remember, it was some elegant piece of meat. He had octopus, what is it, calamari, just cut up on the side. We could nosh on this. This was going to be an all-night cooking affair. Smooth jazz going in the background. You know, I'm thinking, I'm impressed. I'm getting impressed. I'm not a cook, as I said, so I was going to be cook's helper. And he had some gin and tonics that we were going to drink in the meantime. Well, I was hungry. I was expecting to eat sooner than 11 o'clock at night. So my blood sugar was going to really get hit by these gin and tonics anyway, and that's important to know for the story. So I'm just in cool jazz, and I'm drinking my little gin and tonics, and we're noodling around the kitchen, and I'm just thinking, yeah, you know, so this is it. This is cool. You know, this is it. Yuppie thing. Anyway, so there comes a point. I'm going to lay this out for you. This was a counter, and there was a sink here, and then I don't know if I can try to stay into this, but anyway, over here was the stove top. And this gentleman's name was Jeffrey. Jeffrey was doing something over here on the counter, and I'm telling you, I'm in the groove. You know, I'm just like, hey, we're doing this. And he says he wants me to do something in the the pan, on the stove. And so I brown that up, and I think, yeah, that's great. So I have my long wooden thing, and I'm just playing around here, and I'm stirring that up. And I'm going to have to get away from this because I have to be more dynamic. So I'm doing this, and then I'm supposed to put in a big can of chicken broth. And the chicken broth has been sitting there ready. You know, we have all the materials organized, and so yeah, okay. So it was like maybe a quart. I mean, it was a huge can of chicken broth. So I reach over, because, you know, I'm cool, and I'm reaching for this. And I'm gonna shake it, because that's what you do with chicken broth to get the solids up off the bottom. So I'm doing this, and I do a shake. And it feels really wrong. I mean, there's no soup in the can now. So I turn, and I look over at Jeffrey. Now, I just have to tell you what Jeffrey looks like. Jeffrey is a spitting image of Groucho Marx. I mean, literally, he's got the black hair. For Halloween, all he had to do was put on a bow tie with his suit. Groucho Marx, he had the thing. And he had these little glasses. So I turn around, and I look, and there's Jeffrey over here, just blinking. I nailed him. Blinking chicken broth. And they were like all over his glasses, his mustache. There are these drips hanging down. And I'm looking at the can, and I'm looking at him. And he says, very calmly, "Why did you do that?" And I said to him, "Why did you take the top off?" And he said, "I was trying to be helpful." And then, because I'm drinking my gin and tonics, watching him, I start laughing. And I am laughing. I can't
he just looked so funny. And so he excuses himself, he goes up, he changes, he comes back down, he takes the gin and tonic, says, no more gin and tonics for you. And we try to carry on. We try to get back to that cool groove place. But I would look at him and I'd get that flash of what he looked like, and I would start bursting out laughing all over again. It totally blew the coolness. And he would look at me and go, it's the soup again, isn't it? Because I would just be laughing. And that's the way the whole evening went. Sitting down, having this candlelit dinner, and I'd be looking at him and I would just start laughing. Okay, so that is my story. The motto or the moral is don't shake a can of anything until you confirm that the top is still on the can. Thank you.
Are there any other takers? We've got a... Janet, do you want to share?
No, I'm just saying, don't forget to tell them about your little thing here at the end.
Oh, we have a silent auction and food under the tree for the food bank. I was hoping for more people and bags of food. In Nova Scotia, there's a tradition. You never go anywhere. We have a rowboat or a dory, and you always go for a birthday party or an anniversary party, and all you bring is food. And we take pounds and pounds to the local Seventh-day Adventist food bank in our village, and they are so thankful and so appreciative. It's time we started to do the same here in Fairfield. They gave out 500 boxes last week, and there are many, many families that they strive to fulfill the orders every week. It's not easy. We have the money. It's time to share. Time to step up to the plate. I'm going to tell you the story of building the Queen Elizabeth II, the Cunard ocean liner. Once upon a time, in 1966, I knew my father didn't have plans for me in the summer resort business that he started the year I was born in 46. We have a very large complex. My father had a dream in 46 that people would want to dance again after World War II. So he was the iceman and the milkman in our village. And the village is only less than 600 people. He married my mother, who had a maid and a chauffeur as a child. She went to private girls' school and then went on to the University of Toronto and was a physical education teacher. Every summer, she would teach swimming at the Y camp in Hubbards. And she got off the bus, and there was handsome Roy. And she smiled and waved. And over 2 summers, they became friends and eventually became lovers and got married. And bingo, I came along. And Dad had this dream, and they were living with my grandmother. And one morning, my mother looked out the window and said, "Mrs. Harnish, why is there a big hole in the cattle field?" "Oh," she said, "didn't Roy tell you? He's building a dance hall." My mother said, "A dance hall in a cornfield in Nova Scotia? I don't think so. We don't have 10 cents to rub together." Yes, they dug the hole on the May 24th weekend in May of 46, and they opened on August the 24th. Unheard of. No scaffolding. The club went up, all designed by an architect, and the original dance floor was horsehair sprung, so when you dance, it moves. And it's still going after 72 years. So as the oldest of 4, I was sure that I'd get a spot at running the Shore Club, which turned out to be a lobster convention center. And we've served over 1 million pounds of lobster. And last year we won the Reader's Digest Award for the best restaurant in Canada. Pretty good, hey? And we now have a campground that's been going 60 years. We have 198 seasonal trailers that are there 12 months of the year. We're now in our 5th generation of campers. We have 17 cottages and the beach. I don't know if you got to see the picture. And there's a postcard about the lobster. But, you know, we're in lobster season now. And in Christmas Eve, you always had lobster. That was a tradition. So I went to everybody's and bought the last 2 cans of lobster chowder. I thought that might suffice. I just have to find someone to spend Christmas with. It's pretty lonely eating lobster chowder all by yourself. So in 1966, Daddy wasn't going to have anything to do with me. So I set sail in October from Montreal on a Cunard liner, the Franconia. My great-uncle, Dr. Tom Creighton, Aunt Helen's brother, was the Queen's doctor. So I knew I had an in. I mean, to go to London, he had not a practice on Harley Street, on Charles Street, but to know that we're affiliated with the royal family was pretty awesome. And so we arrived on the ship, and my girlfriend was seasick the entire time. She never got out of the cabin. I was out mixing and mingling and socializing and dancing, having a grand time. We took the train from Southampton into the city of London, and we got to Victoria Station, and there's Uncle Mac going up and down in his morning suit or tails going, "Harnish Titus, Harnish Titus." And I thought, who is this fool? And we got off the train, and there was Uncle Mac. He was sending us to his son Peter's for the weekend. He wasn't going to have anything to do with us. So to make a long story short, I lived in London and then moved to Glasgow, Scotland. And I worked for Newell's Insulation and Chemical Company. We did all the pipe covers and boiler covers on every ship built on the Clydebank. I was just 21 years old. What did I know about calcium silicate insulation? What did I know about ships? But lordy, I was in the sales department. So we launched the QE2, and as luck would have it, she was taken down to Southampton for the shakedown cruise, and I got to go with Mr. White and our crew to check her out on her shakedown cruise. So here we were aboard. Captain Warwick, the captain of the QE2, called me Miss Nova Scotia. Samuel Cunard started his company in Halifax in 1840. So it was only proper that he should have a Nova Scotian. And I then broke off my engagement to a Glaswegian architect and had 5 suitcases and 2 trunks to get back to Canada. And I'd moved from Glasgow down to London and worked for Sir Angus Montague, the Duke of Manchester's son, on the Pall Mall. And Angus was an amazing boss to work for. We did a lot of wonderful work together, but I knew I had to get home to Nova Scotia. So I was supposed to go home on Air Canada, but they weren't going to take all my luggage. So I called Cunard and I got the last seat or berth in the maiden voyage in May of '69. What a chance! So I had all of this gear. My brother Clyde had been hitchhiking through Europe. He arrived in London on Uncle Mac's suite of office. You know, he wears tails every day. And Clyde looked like some scruffy hillbilly with lice in his hair. He hadn't shaved in weeks, and he'd been hitchhiking for 6 months through Europe and Egypt and Morocco, high as a kite on drugs. So here I am with this weirdo brother and my Uncle Mac, who, you know, serves the royals. And he saw me off in Southampton, Clyde, and I always wondered if he planted his drugs, you know, in my luggage. So I got on board, and I was in 2nd class, but every night I could dance in the 1st class in the ballroom with the big band orchestras. And if you put your purse down on one of these seats, the vibration was so strong that it was never there when you came back. So one night, I was dancing with Sir Ralph, and my hair was about this length, but in those days, you know, wore hair pieces with velvet bands, headbands. And he caught a watch on my headband, and it fell off in the middle of the dance floor, and he screamed, "Oh my God, I scalped her!" And the orchestra stopped, and everybody looked, and I ran to pick up my hairpiece, and I took off for the bathroom. And all these women came chasing after me, and they said, "We know you're the undercover writer for Woman's Own magazine." Please take a picture of me in my Dior or my, you know, Chanel. And here I am wearing a little gold and yellow muumuu from Walmart in Nova Scotia and little red gold ballet slippers. I don't think I was a press person. So we got along on the journey. Cunard has a policy that they always hire back the old stewards and people that have been on board since day one. So on a maiden voyage, all of the old boys and girls come back. But we lost one of them as we crossed the ocean. So they slowed the ship down, and in the tradition, they buried them at sea. Then one night, the ship really shuddered, and Captain Warwick came on and said, no, we didn't hit an iceberg, because we were destined by every fortune teller that we would sink on our maiden voyage, like the Titanic. And well, that was pretty scary. And he said he would tell us at the cocktail party on the final night. So we all waited with anticipation. There are many people on board that just do the outward leg and the inward leg. They don't even get off in New York. They're just doing it for the sake of being on a maiden voyage. So you meet all the gentry of the, British aristocracy. They're all there because they want to make a maiden voyage. And the QE2 was pretty famous at that time in '69. She's still doing her work. She fought in the Falklands War where she was stripped down to, the bare essentials, but they've refurbished her. And now in Nova Scotia, we have 4 ocean liners a day that come in, and Queen Mary is there quite often, but the QE doesn't come anymore. So we get to New York, and I'm a little hungover, that final goodnight party. And he shares with us about hitting the whale and not an iceberg. And so I remember Mayor John Lindsay was the mayor, and he was going to come out and board and sail down the Hudson with us. They brought him out in a tugboat, and then he climbed up the galley, and I was a little tipsy, and I remember coming down a stairwell and falling into John Lindsay's arms. Talk about embarrassing. I was mortified. And I even had my hairpiece, and you think my skirt's short. I mean, in those days, a miniskirt was really short. And so coming into New York Harbor, it was a fanfare of other ships. The fireboats were out. Every sailboat that ever sailed on the Hudson was there. It was May. And we came up to the dock, and in those days, they winched the luggage ashore. They didn't have conveyor belts. And I had all this gear. And when you disembark, you go to the H for Harnish, or the S for Smith, and you wait for your baggage to be brought in, and you wait impatiently. So with 3,000 passengers, that's a heck of a lot of people to process. So I remember speaking to a black purser, or whatever he was, that I needed to go to the mail room to see if maybe Mum wasn't coming to get me and I'd have to take the train back to Nova Scotia. So he took me through to the mail room. We went through the mail, nothing there. So as we're coming back, I spot Mum and my sister Susan. And I said to him, please let me go to Mummy. No, you mustn't go through. That's, not allowed. And I said, just let me knock on the window to get their attention, to let them know I'm here. And Mum said she'd only come to New York if I could get her on board. But nobody comes on board a ship when she's in port. That's not the protocol. So Clyde, that weird brother of mine, had flown up to Glasgow, and from Glasgow was to go to Halifax, but Air Canada was on strike. So he took a shot, and he came to New York City. And as we were coming up the Hudson, his plane was going over, and he arrived at JFK and took a cab to the dockyard. So here's Susan sitting out in our old station wagon. Mummy's come in and is with me. Finally, my bags arrive, and they said, we're going to ask you to open the two trunks and the 5 suitcases. And I start to cry. And Mum said, what's wrong? I said, I'm hungover, I'm tired, and I have a broken engagement. I don't want to open anything. And the black steward said, I don't want to open another bag either. Just go through. So I was so relieved that he was releasing me. And as we came out, guess what? Clyde walks up to the side of the terminal, And there's Susan waiting in the car, and we're all reunited on the docks of New York City. So we drive to New Brunswick. Mommy has a couple 40 ounces of rum and some cigarettes. Susan has her new trousseau. We're not sure where the dope is. I have all my loot for my trousseau. And we get to customs in St. Stephen, and we go in, and Susan, who has 2 degrees, can't add up $25.84. And the immigration guy says, "There's something very suspicious. I'm coming out to check your vehicle." Well, the look on Mom's face as we opened the door, she just about had a canary. But God provided us with a rainstorm. As soon as he came through the door, it poured. He said, "I'm not getting wet for anybody. Drive on." It took me 5 years to figure out where the dope was. And Clyde, bless his heart, Clyde, I hope you see this. He is still wheeling and dealing, I'm sure. But it's a great story, and I think of the QE2 often, and Mr. Kennard, or Sir Samuel. The long shot was a few years, well, it was in the 80s. She came into Halifax, but it was the day that Air India went down off of Ireland, and all those people perished. So I went down to the gangplank, and I asked if I could come aboard. And Captain Warwick remembered who I was, and he said, "Terry, under the circumstances, nobody can come on board because of this tragedy." So I said, "What's going to happen to you today?" He said, "We're going to the ITT Sheraton Hotel to open the Samuel Kennard Suite." And I thought, bingo, I have a press pass. I'm going to the ITT Sheraton. So I scurried over to the Sheraton. I went up to the suite, and Captain Warwick said, "How the hell did you get here?" I said, "You said that I couldn't come on board, but there was no reason I couldn't come to the press party." He said, "I want to invite you back to the ship." And all the travel agents in Halifax had bet me that I would never get on board. That was strictly not to do. And when I climbed on board, Harry Mathers looked at me and said, "How the hell did you get here? I owe you $50. So may the Kennard liners always sail a happy sea. Who is brave enough to take the wand? Come on. This is recorded for posterity. When we're 90 and we're back here again and again and again.
My stories can be recorded.
Pardon me?
None of the rest of my stories can be recorded.
Are they that wild? Well, we have a cake from Hy-Vee. I thought we'd have about 200, so I ordered the biggest cake they make. There's not much food under the food bank tree. I'm rather disappointed. In the tradition of storytelling, there's always an abundance of food. I have to go back 22 years ago, because this is a riot of a story. I was running a bed and breakfast in my great-grandparents' wedding gift to my grandparents in the village where I grew up. And I'd moved home from Iowa and had this great desire to entertain people. And Susan Chipman knows, and Veda knows, that I worked very, very hard to establish I could sleep 8 a night. And in '95, when I got the house, I launched into my bed and breakfast career. And it was sort of sparsely, you know, a rough beginning, you could say. But in '96, CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, decided to do a 3-year series in Hubbard's, which they called Black Harbor. And we didn't like that working title, but there was nothing we could do. So didn't they pick my bed and breakfast as the home of the TV family? Well, this was really going to be a pinch, because I'd worked at Hawthorne Communications as a production assistant, and I knew what we did to people's houses, especially here in Fairfield, doing the Civil War shoot. So I thought, I'm not going to leave the house as long as this crew are here. And I had my bed and breakfast so that there was a back stairwell upstairs, and then the guests would go up the back stairwell and come down and sit on the steps leading into the living room so that they could watch all of the activity. It was mainly in and out shots on the doorways and on the veranda that they built and in the yard. So they didn't use the actual interior of the house, they built that on a set. So I decided that year in 1996 that I wanted to go to Jonesboro, Tennessee for the first time as a storyteller. Because I started my storytelling, you know, Once Upon a Bright Blue Bay the year before. I needed some experience to hear the greats. So I rang and reserved on the 1-800 number to Jonesboro, and I just innocently said, "Is there ever a chance to stay free?" And she looked at me and she said, "Excuse me? No one stays free in Jonesboro." She said, "We're booked 10 years in advance." I said, "I want you to create a miracle." "Ha," she said, "not a hope in hell." 2 weeks later, my Aunt Phyllis, who's living with me at age 89, calls, or I'm at the grocery store. I come in the yard and she says, "Guess what? Jonesboro called. They have created a miracle." And I said, "What happened?" She said, "Call them right now." So I rang, and Catherine, who was going to be my host, was working at the restaurant in Jonesboro. So I rang, and she said, "I'm really excited to have you, Terry, but we have 2 problems." "Oh," I said, "nothing is a problem in this day and age." She said, "These are 2 big problems." I said, "What are they?" She said, "How do you feel about cats?" I said, "I like cats, I guess." She said, "Have you ever had a cat?" I said, "Yes, I had a cat." She said, "Do you like the smell of cats?" I said, "No, not particularly." She said, "Miss Martha, who owns this house, which is 200 years old, has had 75 cats living on the 2nd floor. This is a 200-year-old house with hardwood floors and old radiators. So the cats have been living, on the 2nd floor, and it smells like, nothing on earth." So she said, Miss Martha's had to do away with 50 of the 75 cats, and she's allowed to keep 25 in the backyard. She said, "If you come, you have to be assured that you have to put rose oil up your nose and bring lots of incense." I said, "Piece of cake." How little did I know. I said, "If that's number 1, what's number 2? She said, "How do you feel about trains?" I said, "We don't have trains in Nova Scotia anymore." She said, "Well, the freight trains come through Jonesboro, and they start their whistle on one end of town, and they go all the way through." And she said, "The house is right on the railroad tracks." And she said, "It vibrates, the house." I said, "Do I get a bed?" She said, "There's 1 bed, and it's on rollers. It's an army cot." She said, "If you're brave enough to get in the bed and be prepared to shake across and bang against the wall, you've got it made." I said, "I think I can cope." She said, "Come early because there's 7 other storytellers, but they're going to have to sleep on the floor, on that yucky, awful keep, mess." So I was delayed in Atlanta and flew into Tri-Cities, and Catherine met me. I went right to registration and didn't really get to go to the house until later that night. And she was right. It was wicked. I mean, I couldn't get enough rose oil up my nose and burn enough incense. And sure enough, when the train came, the bed vibrated. And Jonesboro, that set the stage, and that's why I went back this year. And when you go home, like coming home to Fairfield, it's like you're being with family. We mightn't have seen one another. I haven't seen Barry probably since your wedding in '97. And Jean mentioned that she hadn't seen me before, but years ago. And, we're all family. Doesn't matter where we are in the universe. We are connected on a deeper level. So when I got to Jonesboro this year, and I was covered in hives and looked like I had a unicorn spike, I went to the arms of Donald Davis. He's on the road 300 days a year. And lordy, he's the god of storytelling. And so I take the golf cart over to the library tent, and I go to him and I said, "I'm so sad to hear that Merle, your wife, has died. This is his 2nd wife." And I hug him and he said, "She's dead, Terry." And I said, "End of statement." He said, "She's dead." He said, "But what can I do for you in this lifetime?" I said, "Why don't you come to Nova Scotia in July of 2019 and be part of my storytelling festival?" And guess what? He said, "No charge. I'm coming free." And he saw something on Facebook this week and that I'm doing this tonight. And he emailed me to say that he's coming with his whole family, his 3 sons and his daughter-in-law, Susie. And they're coming to me free, and we're going to have a blowout time. So don't spend your summers in Iowa. Come north to Nova Scotia. Eat lobsters, play on the beach, listen to stories, dig for Oak Island treasure. Captain Kidd buried his treasure, and now we're ready to dig it up. They've been waiting 300 years. 16 people have died. The Discovery Channel has done 4 seasons of documentaries. And it's amazing the number of kids. The Fishbacks went, but they teach at MSAE, The Mystery of Oak Island. I have a book at the back. So it's a blessing to be here tonight. And I thank you for honoring me by being part of the first Once Upon a Winter Solstice. It's rather special. Makes my heart happy. And we are community. We really have to work at keeping close to one another and sharing our stories. I want to tell you my Maharishi story. In 1975, I was practicing dentistry illegally. I had been a trained dental assistant, but my boss was having an affair, so I was doing his dental work, filling and drilling and dilling. And I had a patient in the chair, and I cried tears onto her cheek. And she looked up and she said, "You're not committing suicide today, are you?" I said, "I haven't decided." She said, "Is it going to be the Burlington Skyway or the top of the Sears building?" "I don't know." She said, "I think I have a solution. Why don't you come to an introductory lecture in transcendental meditation?" I said, "I don't think so." That was Thursday. I went on Friday. I was initiated on Saturday. I remember they had a waterbed and 2 little boys. So we used the waterbed as the sort of hearth or the altar. And the little boy screamed. It was about 95 degrees out, and there was a Geiger or a machine breaking up the cement. And it was Saturday. And I remember going to the kitchen to sit on a stool. And I remember Fred coming to me and say, "Slowly open your eyes and tell me how you feel." I said, "I think I'm a little shaky and I think I want to cry." And he said, "Here's a box of tissues." I used 2 boxes of Kleenex. I drank 3 pots of tea, and I went home on my moped at midnight. And that was the beginning of my adventure in transcendental meditation. I became a Siddha in Vancouver, British Columbia. And then in '82, Maharishi called a worldwide course for everybody to come to Europe. And I applied. I wanted to go to Europe. And so I set off to Nova Scotia to say goodbye to my parents. And then they called to say the course was canceled. Maharishi wasn't having the course. Well, I was going on to Copenhagen. A boy who grew up in Hubbards and left when he was 11 and I was 9 was now living in Copenhagen. And he came home and saw a picture of me sitting in 5,000 pounds of lobster in my father's office. And he said, "Is that Terry?" And Mom said, "She's weird. She meditates and eats tofu." And Daddy said, "She's still single. Would you like her address?" And he said, "By all means, I'm a new meditator in Copenhagen. I need to pick her brain." So when Maharishi canceled the course, I went right to Denmark. And I sailed competitively in the Olympics in '76. And my partner was a sailmaker for the Kennedy family. So we all had matching duffel bags. And mine were red with big blue letters for Terry. And I didn't have a suitcase, so I packed all my gear in my duffel bag. And when I get to the Copenhagen airport, and Parker, who I haven't seen since I was 9 and he was 11, has a bunch of carrots, not roses, but carrots. And he looks at the carousel and said, "Oh, look at that. Some poor fool has lost all of their lingerie." And there I looked in my duffel bag. All my bras and panties were going around and around and around. So we stopped the carousel and I regained my goodies. And the only way as a Siddha I could be with Danish people was to be their chef. And so I couldn't get teacher credit, TTC credits, so they paid me in lentils, beans, and rice. So I had 147 people for 17 days at the 2 different academies they have. And nobody would speak English, and I mean, English is their first language. So I was rather ticked off, and I said, "I'm going to go home if you can't speak English to me." And then Maharishi called a course in Stockholm, and they said that Canadians were accepted, so I was really excited. We took the ferry across to Stockholm, and when I got there, they said, "Sorry, Terry, you can't be here. You have to go and stay at another hotel." So they were all going out on the ocean liner. I did get to go to the ceremony on Friday night. I arrived at 8. At 10:30, Maharishi flew in from Singapore, And all of the Mother Divine sat right up front, but they invited me to come and sit with them. And we were cutting the cake at 4 in the morning. I knew I was missing a big party. And then I came back and came here with Susan Chipman on CCP. And Marishi came that Christmas for the Taste of Utopia. And I got to clean the urinals and the toilets in the frat where he was going to stay. I worked hard to get those toilets clean. And then I go by to collect the lamps and the pillows. And Keith Wallace's mother said, I don't want to give up my lamp and my pillows for Marishi. I said, please, Mrs. Wallace, please let me have it. And I go by the frat, and there are the toilets and urinals out on the yard. They're replacing them all. But I had the smallest hands, so I was the only one that could hang the new drapes, the silk drapes, behind the valance. So I got the big award for the Taste of Utopia. I'm sure many of you did. And that was in '83. And then he went to Washington, D.C., and we were on the mall. And as luck would have it, I decided I wasn't going to sit with it or stand with the single ladies. And I decided I'd move to the married section. And there were Sue and Fred Poneman, all of the big movers and shakers in the movement. And I remember standing there, and this man came over, Oscar Harani, and he said, are you married? I said, no, I wish I were. And he said, well, let's pretend we're married today. We can stand together. So Oscar said to me, where are you from? And I said, Hubbard's, Nova Scotia. He said, is it close to Halifax? And I said, yes. He said, I have a daughter in this world, and she lives in Halifax. I said, what's her name? Marcella Abagov. I said, my golly, she's my best friend. What was the chance of being there and meeting Oscar? Quite amazing. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.